So, as I said, good evening and welcome to our webinar on farm diversification. My name is Nicola Palmer and I am the marketing manager at the Rural Planning Co. Unsurprisingly, this has proven to be a popular topic, so thank you all for joining us on a Monday evening. I've had a little look at some of the statistics for farm diversification in preparation for this webinar, and some NFU research has revealed that 34% of UK farmers have already diversified on their farms, and of those, 37% expect the importance of non-farming activity to grow over the next 5 years. As financial pressures and uncertainty continues for our farmers, this is clearly an important time to explore your options and your opportunities. Farm diversification ideas are almost endless, from farm shops, renting storage space, tourist accommodation, viticulture, pick your own, pet boarding, dog walking sites, livery yards, office space, to name just a few of the options available. This webinar is intended to give you an insight into some of the things you should consider when setting up a new enterprise, and we're delighted to be joined by some experts in this field. We will hear firstly from Antony Pearce, who will talk us through the farm diversification options and opportunities. Antony is a partner at Dudley Peverill, which is an innovative rural consultancy firm focused on farm diversification. He has an extensive history working in agriculture and qualified as an accountant before returning to the family farm. He is passionate about helping farming families make the leap into a diversified enterprise. Hannah Mole, founder of and planning consultant at the Rural Planning Co, will then cover planning criteria and strategy. Hannah is a rural chartered surveyor and planning consultant with a wealth of knowledge and a huge passion for agriculture and rural business. Hannah also farms alongside her husband in Worcestershire and strives to help farmers achieve their goals through effective use of the planning process. And finally, Matt Ryan, Head of Farmer Relationships at Oxbury Bank Plc, will cover the options available to finance your project. Matt has led the farmer-facing team at Oxbury to major lending and revenue milestones and farmed himself with his family in New Zealand. We will be taking questions from the audience during the presentation. Please feel free to post these on the chat, and we will then either cover them off during or at the end. So without further ado, I will pass you over to Antony.
Thank you very much, Nicola. I'm just waiting for my screen.
Here we go.
So hopefully you can all see a picture of my family. So Nicola, can you give us a thumbs up for that?
Yeah, so I think that looks fine. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so good evening, everybody. A little bit of an introduction. My name is Antony Pearce. Amongst other things, I'm a third-generation farmer. We farm about 430 hectares around Aylesbury, mostly combinable crops, but also some Christmas turkeys and lots of commercial rentals. This is the local area. My farm is just off this camera shot, top right-hand corner. It's definitely urban fringe, which is an asset or a liability depending on your perspective. But it is certainly, when I came back to the farm, an area that we found ourselves in. And we were already marketing Christmas turkeys. It was an enterprise that had grown, but under the pressure of supermarkets had somewhat retracted. And so we refocused on just selling direct to the consumers and started to build the business back up. And really, this was where my journey with diversification began. And it began in 2007. With let me just move that out of the way. 2007 with a grant funding to renovate what was just a turkey hanging facility into a full-blown butchery and evisceration centre. And from there in 2008, we, hang on a second. We moved on to selling some of our own lambs. So we were doing a box lamb system, and then we moved on to supermarket sales where we were providing fresh cuts. And at one point we were marketing about 6 to 8 lambs a week. Now that's no longer an enterprise that we run on the farm, but it was certainly provided a springboard into further diversification. And really, so tonight I'd like to talk to you about what I, as a farmer and as a partner at Dudley Peverill Associates, consider to be the 5 unique challenges that farmers face when they're trying to start a diversification business. So firstly, the question we often hear is, well, where do I start? And that's quite simple. Start with a plan. And really take where you are now, have a vision of where you need to go in the future, and then devise a plan, a strategic plan to get from where you are now to where you want to go. It won't be straightforward, but at least if you have an eye on the prize, you can try and identify the best way of getting there. Now, the picture in front of you is of a distillery we're putting in for a client. So the distillery itself and its visitor centre is the topmost building with all the skylights. In the middle is the client's grain store, and right at the bottom, the edge of the building is his mother's house. And really this epitomises an issue we quite often find, that farming businesses are a mix of different uses, and really identifying how you use those different uses and how they mix with each other is very important when you're setting out your initial plan. And if you continue to be stuck and you say, well, I can't picture where I'm going to go because I don't even know where that is yet, then we offer a free online tool called the Diversification Assistant. And the point of the Diversification Assistant is to ask you a series of questions to try and get you to think through what sort of thing would suit you. Are you good with people engagement, engaging with the public, or would you prefer to be, private? What sort of level of business involvement do you want? Do you want to rent out, or do you want to be involved in the business? How good is your access? All these sorts of things will narrow your choices down as far as what diversification enterprise will best suit you and your business. So second question, who do I go to? Leading on from our the previous case, this is a client who bought a small holding, and they'd only ever lived and farmed on a hill. To discover they'd bought a property in the middle of a floodplain was a revelation to them. And in their particular case, they knew they had a flooding issue. They were thinking about holiday lets and who do we go to try and alleviate this problem. So as Nicola made the point early on, there's such a massive range of diversification opportunities. There's so many different people you can go to. What we try and do is match people to the professionals who are offering the advice to make sure the fit is as accurate as possible to help generate the best possible income and outcome. And so we'll come back to flooding in just a moment. Thirdly, time pressure. You already have a busy business. The likelihood is that you aren't sitting around twiddling your thumbs, that you need to deliver for that business, but can you also deliver on a diversification business? And certainly we're coming up against a lot of cases where planning authorities are asking questions in the last day of their statutory period. And that puts a lot of pressure on a farmer. You could be lambing, calving, baling, harvesting, whatever that your chosen peak of workload is, and to have that planning application be turned down simply because you were unable to answer a simple question seems to us really unfair. So one of the services we offer is like a recommendation service, where we'll go and visit a farmer in the field and say, look, to the best of our knowledge, this is the suggested action that we suggest you follow. Can we just say yes and move on? And it helps maintain momentum and stops your project stalling. So fourth, not to steal any thunder from the last speaker, but how to finance your plan. This is actually one of my own projects. If you see the sort of red painted roof in the middle distance, it's a timber frame building. It used to house our turkey plucking. So it was only being used 2 days a year, and we thought we could get better use out of it. Now, as you can see afterwards, it's a fantastic looking project, but it was in a floodplain. And how could we deliver in a floodplain in a challenging local environment? And we actually used the historic building behind it as leverage to debate with the planners that this was a building worth saving. But the point about finance is, at the time, I didn't have the finance to convert this myself. Half the value of the gain was in the planning permission, and half of it was actual conversion. And for those fans of Kevin MacLeod and Grand Designs, you will know that rarely do timber frame buildings get delivered on budget. So we sold this as a service site and used the funds to develop the smaller property on the right hand side of the picture, a single story bungalow, which still provides a rental income now. And that's really what I would encourage you to do as part of your estate plan or your strategic plan, is to look at stepping stones or waypoints in order that you can tier your finance as you work through your project. So, detailed feasibility studies. When you go to see your bank, they're definitely going to have to ask for your business plan. And we work on a slightly different basis. Not only is it a business plan, but rather than simply saying, I have to deliver, I'm going to sell my rooms for £100 a night, we would do reverse costings. So we say it will cost us £50 a night to cost of production to produce this room, on the assumption of 80% occupancy. And then we might say, well, local to the area, the average rate for a similar room is 75, average occupancy is 90%. Then it gives the bank reassurance that you've done your market research, that you have identified a route to market, and that you understand the budgets. It's sort of more than simply providing a business plan. And after all, markets do change. Here's an example of stables being converted into offices. Post-pandemic, offices have come under pressure, but this building is actually can be sectioned into a series of smaller units and actually has proved remarkably COVID-proof. So that's something else we like to encourage clients to think about, being market-led. Can you take a small part of your project forward first, taste the market? If the market likes what your offering is, then you ramp it up to a larger scale. It's a safer way of progressing into diversification. And finally, succession. Quite often we find that there's a generational split. The older generation quite often hold the asset, and they're worried about security and not taking on too much risk, whilst the younger generation is more interested in improving income streams and diversification. And so how do you square this circle? We facilitated a lot of conversations where we can engineer transfer of title to enable a younger generation to take that idea, diversification idea, forward by themselves, using it as collateral without risking the whole family business. And I would really encourage you to seek out a professional who you can work with, who can facilitate such discussions. So just to recap briefly, you're thinking about diversification. Any new enterprise must not interfere or be detrimental to your core farming enterprise. So think about how you manage your time around the new enterprise and the existing enterprise. What new skill sets are required? What gaps in your knowledge are there? The existing time constraints you have, how is that going to be best managed throughout the development and the startup period? How are you going to access finance? And what are the market demands, and how are you going to get to the market? All part of a strong business plan. And finally, succession discussions, if that's necessary. How are you going to leverage those assets? Does there need to be a transfer of assets within the family? And so really, just as a quick summary, we split our business into two halves. Firstly, on the left, property investment projects where, for example, you would convert an agricultural building into Class R, in this case, industrial units, or on the right-hand side of the slide, more enterprise-led projects like the whiskey distillery or dog training and secure dog walking and glamping and accommodation. That's some of the projects that we have been involved with recently. So thank you very much for listening, and over to Nicola.
Thank you, Anthony. That was fantastic. Just a question for you before we move on to Hannah. How exactly would you establish market demand for a project?
So actually, there's generally quite a lot of data out there, and we have some proprietary software that helps identify demographics. Travel time is very important. You need to identify what sort of target group, if you know the demographic of the family, you know what their spend is, those sorts of things. And you can also use your competition. You know, you can identify sort of what they're charging, what their dwell times are. And, you know, I quite often encourage clients to go out and do the research themselves. If they've got a young family, go to a farm shop or a, you know, rare breeds park or whatever it is. Enjoy the research, because if you don't enjoy going to those events, you sure aren't ever going to enjoy running one.
Yeah, agree. Okay, fantastic. Right, we will now move on to Hannah. Just Matt, if you can hear us, we just had a few technical glitches. If you could share your webcam, that would be fantastic, so we can see you. I can see your names on the screen. But in the meantime, if we could move on to Hannah, and she's going to talk us through planning criteria and strategy. There's Matt. That makes me feel a lot better. Thank you, Hannah.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Can you see my screen, Nicola?
Yes, yeah, we can.
Okay, marvellous. And if I go through one just to check, are we still there?
Sorry, perfect, yeah.
Okay, lovely. Evening, everybody. Thank you to you all for joining us this evening. It's nice to see so many people joining us on a Monday night, and a really interesting start from Anthony there. So I'm going to cover some of the basics about planning when you're considering a farm diversification project. And what I'm actually going to do is split this up into two parts over the next sort of 15 minutes or so. And the first part is going to cover permitted development rights. So permitted development rights are what the government says you can do without actually getting planning consent for. It's not obviously quite as easy as that, because there's a few other little nuances in there. But the government, in the general permitted development order, have set out a number of things, a number of activities and types of development that you can do on your farms without actually getting planning for. So I'm going to set some of the most common ones out to you. And then secondly, I'm going to move on to, okay, so either if you don't meet the permitted development rights, or you've used your permitted development rights and now you need to go to planning, what happens next? So what's that planning process? What are the red flags, the deal breakers? Will you actually get planning? And then if you have to go through the process, what does that look like? So that's what I'm going to cover. So starting off then with section 1, which is the permitted development rights, and I'm going to just cover temporary campsites. Hang on a second.
We'll just talk amongst ourselves while Hannah deals with her childcare. Everybody loves a live webinar, Hannah, don't worry. More
important people than me.
Everybody loves a live webinar, marvellous.
Oh, you can't beat a bit of on the moment. So temporary campsites then. So actually the government introduced a new permitted development which started in July just gone, and this is class BC. And what that allows for is the use of land as a temporary campsite. And what the government have done is extended this now, so you can have up to 60 days per calendar year for up to 50 camping pitches. The Class BC permitted development right also allows for mobile facilities. That has to include, and one of the slightly unusual things about this one is that it says it must include toilet and waste disposal facilities. If you want to go ahead with and utilise this permitted development right, you have to do something called a prior notification to the local planning authority, which is basically a site plan and a short form. The only exception to that is that if your land is within a flood zone 2 or 3, then it's a slightly more involved process, not full planning still, but you have to actually get prior approval. I'll talk to you later on in the presentation about how to identify what flood zone your land is in. The restrictions on this Class BC is that you can't have it on a scheduled monument, a safety hazard zone, SSSI. It says listed building, but I would also assume probably the curtilage of or grounds of a listed building, and check if you're in any conservation areas, because sometimes that falls into a slightly different part of the legislation. So that's what the new camping permitted development right is going to allow, or is already allowing, and that includes tents, camper vans and motorhomes, but it doesn't include towed caravans, so like touring caravans. So that's a new one from July 2023, up to 60 days a year and up to 50 pitches and toilets and so on. So that's something that people might want to start taking advantage of from next season. Under caravans, now caravans is quite a extensive piece of legislation, so I'm just pulling out a couple of things here. But basically, if you've got more than 5 acres, you can have caravans on it for up to 28 days a year, or you can look for an exempted organisation such as Caravan and Camping Club, Freedom Camping. There's a long list of them. And you can apply to join and be a member of one of those exempted organisations, and they can issue you with a licence to run up to 5 caravans on a site without actually getting planning consent. Now, this actually can include things like shepherd's huts, motorhomes, mobile lodges, static caravans and so on. It's basically, as long as it's designed or adapted for human habitation and it is capable of being moved from one place to another, whether or not it is, but as long as it is capable of being, then in theory it meets the definition of a caravan. There are some size restrictions which are there on the right hand side, but if you meet the definition of a caravan, you can apply to one of these exempted organisations to have up to 5 caravans on the site without actually getting planning permission. Now this is really useful if you are in a location where you wouldn't otherwise get planning. So for example, green belts, possibly some sort of more sensitive areas and things, although the Caravan and Camping Club or the exempted organisations may look at some of those restrictions. But certainly Greenbelt is one that you probably wouldn't be able to get a glamping site or a caravan site. So this is something that you can use and utilise. The one thing to remember is that this permitted development only allows the siting of the caravans. If you need to put in hard standing for parking, if you want to put up decking or install drainage, technically that requires a separate planning permission. But again, if you start off using the 5 caravans through one of these exempted organisations, applying for some of that secondary stuff can be an easier route. Class B of the General Permitted Development Order allows you to temporarily change the use of land for any purpose for up to 28 days per calendar year. That's reduced to half if it's a market or for motorcycle racing. Now those days don't need to be consecutive, they can be any days in the calendar year. Technically, you are supposed to return it to agriculture in between uses. You can't use this for a caravan site because now that comes into permitted development. And from July of next year, you can't use it for the camping either. That moves to the Class BC that we've talked about. So this is quite useful to use if you want to try something. So if you wanted to sort of dip your toes into a new project or a new sort of plan of something, but you don't want to go to the full expense or start to wind up the neighbours in terms of going for the full planning application, this is something that you can try and just dip your toe in and see if it's something that you feel there's a market for, if it's something you want to run, if you're going to enjoy doing it, you know, what the feedback is from the neighbours, did they even notice it was on? And so a good example of this is something like weddings. If you wanted to trial putting weddings on your land, so a marquee out or something like that on your land, you can do 28 days a year without actually getting planning permission. So what you've got to remember is that this is for each day that the change of use has occurred counts to one of your 28. So if it was a wedding, if you had a Thursday, Friday setup, Saturday wedding, Sunday takedown, that's 4 of your 28. Then technically it goes back to agriculture on the Monday, and you can do the same the following Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and so on. So you can sort of count up your 28 days, but it's a really good way of starting something without going through the full expense. Similarly, if you live in a location or your land is in a location where perhaps we would struggle to get planning, it might allow you to do some, albeit perhaps a smaller number than you might want to otherwise, but it would allow you to do some without actually getting planning. So moving on then, the government again have introduced relatively recently something called Class R, which Anthony referred to, and this is changing the use of an agricultural building to commercial use. Now this is very, very useful actually, because we use it quite regularly, where if we're looking perhaps to develop a series of buildings on a farm, we will do this on the first one, let it run for a few months or 12 months or longer. Then you can really demonstrate to the council that there haven't been any issues, that there's a market demand, there have been no problems with the neighbours, it's not caused undue noise or anything else, so as that when you come to do shed number 2 or building number 2, you've already sort of got some experience of that commercial use in that location. And it is actually then easier to demonstrate to the council when undertaking a planning application for the next one that all of the sort of normal impacts can be addressed and have been addressed. So what you can do with a Class R is you can change the use of an agricultural building to any of these following uses. The first one, which is very common on farms obviously, is just general storage. So storage and distribution, that's Class B8. And then you can also change the use of an agricultural building to Class E, and that is for general business, service and commercial. And obviously most commonly again on farms, that is light industrial in a residential area, but actually and usefully it could be offices, it could be shops, farm shops, cafes and so on. The thing to remember about this Class R though is that it doesn't cover any physical building changes or building operations. So if, just going back onto this one, if you decided to change those last 3 bays into Class R, you could, under Class R, you could get the change of use, but after that you would then have to apply for the roller shutter doors or to clad it or whatever. In order to qualify for Class R, the building has to have been there for at least 10 years. In solely agricultural use, and obviously that's what you need to prep before you do an application to make sure that it meets that. You can change up to 500 square metres on one planning unit. After 500 square metres, you're back into requiring planning permission. The restrictions are that it can't be a listed building, but it is one that can be in a national park and an AONB and a conservation area. And that's much more generous than some of the other permitted development rights. So section 2, very quickly, this is a little bit of a run through. Those permitted development rights are quite common for, that we are using on behalf of clients to help facilitate their farm diversification. Not forgetting that there are other permitted development rights, and Anthony touched on it, things like Class Q, which is the change of use of an agricultural building to residential. I'm not going to cover that today. We've got other YouTube videos and stuff on that if that's something that you want to consider. But moving on then, so if we need to now get planning permission for the change of use or to build anything in association with your farm diversification, what I want to cover in the first instance is something to help you really from the start, going back to Anthony's feasibility. What are you and aren't you going to be able to get planning for? Can you get finance? Obviously moving on to maths section, but this bit is going to help you do your own research and a first level filter of whether you are or aren't going to be able to get planning for something. So this is something you can go and do the research before you even pick up the phone to a planning consultant. So I want to outline 3 red flags, and these are things that if we can't overcome, it might scupper your farm diversification plans altogether. And the first one that you have to know about is whether you are or aren't in the green belt. Now, green belt is a government designation, and you either are in it or you're out of it. You're not a bit in it or a bit out or on the edge. You're in it or you're out of it. You could literally be standing on a line and you're in or you're out. Now, green belt, unfortunately and frustratingly, and I could waffle on for hours about the logical merit of this, but green belt almost entirely precludes new build commercial development on farms. You can, in the green belt, get change of use of buildings, and you can, in some instances, get the change of use of land, so long as it retains the openness of the land. To give you an example, things like menages and dog walking facilities, generally speaking, we can get in the green belt because that's still an open use. It's a change of use of the land from agriculture, but it's open. What the green belt will stop you doing is building brand new buildings for commercial use. There are very, very few exceptions to this where you can show what's called very special circumstances, but you don't get them very often. I've done it 2 or 3 times in my career where you can actually demonstrate very special circumstances. Very, very high bar, to overcome. So the long and short of it is, you don't want to be in the position where you are applying for new build or anything that is new structures. So even glamping in the green belt can be difficult, and that's why I said you go off and use your permitted development for that, because we are unlikely to be able to get you planning permission even for a relatively small scale glamping in the green belt. It has happened, you do occasionally slip them through, but this is a general principle. So what you need to be looking at, if your farm and your land is located within the green belt, you are restricted to changing the use of your buildings and open use land uses. So a little bit of strategy here, obviously, is what we can get you planning for in the green belt is new agricultural buildings. So think of it in terms of using permitted development, agricultural permitted development rights, getting planning for new agricultural buildings on your farm. Then at the correct point in time, you can start to change the use of your older buildings. So perhaps replace them with new, start to change the use of older buildings. That's a strategy we utilise quite regularly, but we won't be able to get you new ones. How to find out if you're in the green belt? You need to go to this website, which is Magic Maps, and you need to tick on the left designations, go down to green belt, and it will bring up the green belt limits. I think I've got just a couple more slides. The next two red flags, highways and access. We have got to be able to get you safe access to the site. Diversification inevitably means a different type of traffic to agriculture, and generally speaking, it means people and cars. And we've got to be able to demonstrate in a planning application that you can get safe access to a site. Flood risk, permanent overnight accommodation, i.e. glamping, is very difficult to achieve in flood risks, flood zones 2 and 3. And some other projects where it involves people being there regularly might be limited in those zones as well. In order to find out what you're in, then you just Google flood map for planning and you follow a series of sort of questions, put in your postcode and go through, and you will arrive with a plan that looks like this. So you can do that research yourself. And then lastly, you need to check as to whether you're in any other designations. So whether you are in or close to an area of outstanding natural beauty, listed buildings, triple SIs. Now these designations, conservation areas, things like that, these designations are difficult, but not impossible. I would describe that as being an orange flag. So find out what you're in, find out all about your site, and then you're in a much better position to determine what type of diversification proposals are likely to be acceptable for the planners. Will you get planning? I'm just going to not talk through this as such, but basically if you have gone through those deal breakers, we're now in a position, will the local authority like what I am proposing? So what you need to do is look up planning policy, look up a local plan, and there will be a policy which is something like rural economy, farm diversification. Read it, see what it says, that's your rule book. You can look up other local applications to see whether they were supported, what the planning officer said about them. Now, normally applications for rural development and farm diversification are supported, but I do encourage you to check local criteria within that local plan. You've got a handful of things, well, probably more than a handful, that you need to look at. Technical delivery. I'm not going to cover those, we haven't got time today, but those are the sorts of things that a planning officer in determining a planning application will want to see that you have assessed. And then lastly, when you come to making the planning application, obviously you should use a planning consultant. I say not an architect, and that's not to not to say that not to go to an architect. An architect is design led. Planning consultants are, can we get you planning in the first place? Then we use an architect to help us design the scheme. But generally speaking, especially where your project might be a bit on iffy grounds, a planning consultant will give you the best chance of success. And even though it might feel expensive at the start, I promise you in the long term, it will all happen more efficiently and more quickly and probably cost you less money in the long run. prepare well, get all the relevant surveys, understand that there might be some neighbour pushback and a little bit of confrontation, and sometimes you've just got to get a bit of a thick skin when you put your planning application in. It doesn't always feel that nice. Last two things, make sure that you have a budget. Planning isn't cheap. Unfortunately, we are asked for more and more surveys all the time. Planning fees are going up. You know, that it's not a cheap process, I'm afraid. And as Antony referred to, allow plenty of time. This can take months, you know, allow 6 months minimum. It can take longer than that in some instances to get planning through. So don't, you know, come expecting to be able to get it in a couple of months and be up and running. You need to allow plenty of time. So that is the rest of my presentation. Just we're the Rural Planning Co. This is exactly what we do. We specialise in rural business, residential, ag and equestrian, all sorts of planning across England. And we're always delighted to hear from anybody that would like any help. So I will hand you back to Nicola.
Thank you, Hannah. We have a question here from somebody who has looked at a camping exemption certificate. She's asking, what happens if your farmhouse is listed and the LPA say they deem that the curtilage of the listed building includes your farm track, and that's the main track people would need to use to get your diversification business, to your diversification business?
That's quite a specific question.
Mm.
Yes, do you know what? I think probably let's have a look at that one afterwards, because I think that probably needs a little bit of thinking about, not trying to escape out of the question. When you're getting into things like curtilages and things like that, we just need to probably have a bit more of a look at that, if that's okay. Can you ask the person that asked the question just to send us some info?
Yeah, no problem. Another question, could class B, C and A be combined? So you would have permitted development rights for camping plus 5 caravans?
Yes, I don't see why not. What you probably have to do is have them on, if you were to show a site plan, you'd have to probably show them on, they could be adjacent to each other, but they'd probably have to be, we'd have to show them as slightly distinct areas, but I don't see why not.
Okay, great. Right, we've got more questions, but we'll just move on to Matt first and then come back to some at the end, if that's okay. So here we go, on to the finances, crucial aspect of the project. Okay, Matt?
I can, yeah, I'm here. I just my screen is, oh, there we go. Okay, so you can see my screen there. Four lovely Wagyu cattle standing in a nice grassy field. Excellent. Thank you very much. So look, and thanks for the opportunity to come and speak this evening. So as what I'm going to do, I'm going to break this into 3 hopefully succinct parts. So first I'll talk a little bit about Oxbury Bank and just who we are, and we'll get past that quite quickly. There'll be some thoughts and a few musings, I suppose, on the current cycle of agricultural investment, and just where it's at, and how history has kind of shown some of these agricultural cycles to be, and some points on obviously farm diversification, and I suppose what a bank manager may ask some of the audience, and also what your bank managers may get asked when they come back to the office. So moving on, so Oxbury, who are we? So these are just some of the products obviously that we offer. So we've got quite a working capital focus internally, and we do some a lot of farm input financing, normal revolving credits. The bulk of what we do though is farm loans out to 25 years, 75% loan to value ratios. We fund like any normal bank does off the savings market, so we are as competitive as everybody else. We do asset finance as well for your kit, and we do some food chain finance, some specialist stuff for cattle and pullets, and we're looking at some some strawberry parent stock financing as well down in Kent and a few other things. So very, very specific, but the bulk of what we do is on farm loans. Probably our unique selling point there on the farm loans is you can actually nominate when you're, I forgot to set my timer, apologies. You can nominate actually when you want to pay the capital portions of your loan. So if you've got a farm diversification that pays quarterly or something like that, you can time the capital portions of your loan to pay and match them to your rent cycle. Dairy farmers love it. and as do many other farmers, so they can time their cash flows for grass farming, spring calving dairy farmer in Yorkshire or something like that, where they're flush with cash from June onwards, and they go interest only over the winter rather. A few things about us, and I won't dwell on this, but all we do is food and farming, and we were built for the agricultural industry. We've got dedicated relationship managers, and they're all ag trained. They're all farmers' sons and daughters from the Harpers, the Reddings, the Siren Sisters, and the Newcastles, and we've got a couple from Aberystwyth with as well, actually. And so they're all, which poses a challenge for us sometimes during summer when they're all away at harvest and milking cows and bits and pieces, which is great. We've got our own technology platform, so we actually build a lot of our loan products specifically for agricultural use, which hasn't been done probably before in the banking market, if we're honest. It's a little bit about our timeline. So the company was first incorporated in 2018, where the business plan was put together. The first part of the banking license was granted in 2020. And when you get a banking license, the Bank of England, and it's not for the faint-hearted, I can assure you, nor should it be, the Bank of England turns around to you and says, right, Oxbury Bank, how are you going to benefit the British economy? And you present your business plan and they go, great, okay, we're on board with that. Here are 40 conditions for you to satisfy, which includes capital raising, complaint, cycles, and showing you have enough staff and that your systems actually work and you've got the right security in your banking platforms and everything else. So you've got to be able to demonstrate that before you actually are allowed to take on customers. So getting a banking license is great. It's getting this bit here, the final launch part of the banking license, which was granted in March 2021. As you can imagine, we had a heck of a celebration in January 2020, which is very short-lived, as we all know. It happened 2 months later when the world was plunged into chaos, and we spent the better part of over a year on Teams getting a banking license and putting the bank together, which was nothing short of a barrel of joy, I can assure you. The first customers were onboarded in April 2021, and we got moving, and the business reached its first break-even result in December of last year, and the lending book surpassed £500 million in August, and with a big pipeline out the front. So I suppose what I'm trying to say there is there was clearly a need for a specialist provider here in the UK market. It's about a £24 billion market in terms of borrowings, and no one seemed overly interested in it, which was a happy, sad moment. Sad that a great economy, rural economy like the British ag industry was unloved like that, but great for us as we've been able to put something together and get moving. We are an industry initiative with commercial goals, so our key shareholders are the likes of the Duke of Westminster, Frontier, Hutchinson's, and a long line of farmers, as well as the founders and some staff as well. So it's basically the industry coming together, doing it properly, forming a bank, and getting moving, which is exactly what we've done. And it's been a nice validation over the past 18 months as well, which is even more pleasing. On to the second part. So I said I was going to some musings about the cyclical nature of agriculture, and I suppose it's the irony of me talking about a commodity cycle here isn't lost on me, given that we're talking about farm diversifications, but bear with me, and I'm sure I'll bring it home. I suppose the key point here in all agricultural cycles is sometimes there's a lot of appetite and sometimes there isn't. Typically, the traditional agricultural industry worked on commodity cycles that followed, this one here that you're seeing is actually dairy milk price. This is what we call the global dairy trade index. And this is over 10 years. And roughly the global dairy trade index, peaked and troughed about every 8 years, right? So it goes up, it's up in, 2013, 2014, and then it usually dips quite soon after. But about every 8 years, it generally rolls around again. And that's the way you've got to look at it, right? You don't look at lending to farms on an annualized year by year kind of basis. You've got to take a long-term view. I suppose that's the point. And why this slide really shows that, if you were lending short-term in agriculture, you'd find it too scary and you'd stay out of it. Just a few key points to industry prosperity. Again, it's ironic I'm talking about this on a farm diversification seminar, but it's generally linked to commodity cycles. One thing I will say is we have been inundated at Oxbury since our launch with farmers wanting to borrow money for diversifications of various kinds, and we'll talk a little bit about them later. Commodities are cyclical. Banks can lend too much in the good years and too little during the downturns. So, this is why some well, diversification in businesses are great, and also banks have got to take a 3-4 year view on the price of wheat, the price of beef, milk solids, pence per litre, or whatever it is. But you've got to look at a 4 or 5 year average, otherwise you're not really doing a good job of it. Like I say, you need to know what you're doing. Ag lending is a specialist field. There are nuances all the way through it, and general commercial lenders just will not get it. Progressive agribusinesses have been investing in diversified income streams since prior to COVID, and that's probably been more of a signal from the removal of subsidies and whatnot coming off. Probably one thing that I will say when it comes back to commercial lending is it is a specialist field, and we've built our whole front line at Oxbury on the notion that it's easier to teach a farmer to be a banker than a banker to be a farmer, and we'll stand by that. Also, when it comes to borrowing in the agricultural lending market, you've got to keep it simple. There's so much out of your control. You've got to focus on little things like cost of production, risk mitigation, and certain efficiencies you can get within your business. You can't control the weather, you can't control what the international markets are doing, but there is a lot of stuff that is within farmers' controls that can be done to a really high standard that really helps. On to diversification must-haves. So a well-planned and costed build, I suppose this goes without saying, and I won't kind of tread on the toes of the people that have come before me, but this is probably one area we see quite a lot of these, and we want to see things like, when is the delivery date? Is the delivery date going to be linking in with the proposed revenue stream? What are the consequences of revenue streams if the build's late, and those kind of things. Planning permission, permitted development. Again, we've seen some fantastic slides just previously now on that. All I'll say there is you will not get the money delivered unless you have planning permission, or the loan will be approved subject to planning permission granted or permitted development in most cases. Budgets and cash flows, this kind of goes without saying. In a lot of cases, a lot of the farm diversifications that we have done have been a kind of probably 60% of them will have been on a kind of equity release basis. So an existing farm borrowing money against its annual revenue streams and converting a barn, putting some holiday lets in or commercial lets on farm or something like that. So we generally see a total farm diversification plan, so the added diversification income and costs lumped in with the total farm business, but we always want to see accurate income and costings for the separate diversification as well. So we want to see it all in one, the whole farm, and also split out on its own to see the actual individual nature of the diversification and how profitable it is. Licenses and tenancies. So there's all sorts of things that we've seen. We've linked on woodland burial plots. My personal favourite was planning permission not granted for a loan up in Yorkshire, where the farm was converting some shedding to graze donkeys for the donkey sanctuary. It was actually one of the more profitable ones that we saw that quarter, actually. But it just goes to show what's possible out there, and the great, I suppose, competitive advantage that British agriculture has compared to a place like New Zealand. You probably can't tell, but I'm from there, where all you can do is produce vast amounts of commodities, and you can do all sorts of things here, which is a real strength. Due diligence. These last two, due diligence and returns per square metre, professional advice and feasibility and returns. So that's a conversation to be had with your friendly land agent or consultants, and we'll be wanting to see some good DD on that and how well thought through it is. Other factors to consider. What legal entity will it trade through? Advice sought. So that's where your accountant comes in. In years gone by of single farm payments, and when there was your single farm payment might be compromised in some cases if there's too much diversified income going through your sole trader or partnership. That's one example. So that's very important. Storage, office space, what insurance needs are there going to be? What's that going to cost? Who are the providers? Have you got that sorted? Have you looked at that before there's any lending is done? repairs. So if it's a commercial let or something like that, who's responsible for repairs? Background checks on tenants. So we'll be interested to hear, what level are you going to be going to? This is obviously in the situation of, say, a commercial let on farm. What level are you going to check on these tenants in terms of their solvency, for want of a better term? Are you going to be conducting credit checks, credit scoring, and those kinds of things? And obviously, there's going to be limitations on what can be stored as well. We're not that keen on, waste storage and those kind of things. We'll look at it, but there's some very special DD, specialist DD that'll be needed to be done. That's it. I know I've fired through that. I hope I'm on time there. Yeah, any questions?
Thank you, Matt. That was great. One thing I just noted from listening to you is how important your aspect is with the planning. So things like, Hannah will sort of talk about this a bit more, but things like rural workers dwellings and the business plans that goes into those, and then going from temporary to permanent. It's so important that the two things work hand in hand. Do you think, Hannah? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, yeah, I popped you on mute. And I think perhaps maybe, would I be right in saying that perhaps maybe people don't necessarily think about that before they, they don't expect that to be, that it's all got to be there in that level of detail before they come to you, perhaps sometimes?
Oh, all the time. Yeah, absolutely. So it's great because we love being involved early. But some of these planning, as we know, planning can take a long time, can't it? So we can help with advice, and we can talk about interest rates and loan structure and all these other things. The planning is just crucial. Yeah, absolutely. Usually the first thing a credit manager asks one of my managers is, where are they at with planning? Okay, so this could take a while, is usually how that every conversation goes.
Yeah. Tell me, Matt, what sort of percentage of your projects or loans are for diversification? Would you know, or is it for normal, normal standard farming businesses?
I'm unsure of the actual percent. Sorry, yeah, no, it's really good. I like that. Well done. And I don't want to dodge this by sounding like too much of a politician, but a higher proportion than what we planned. We do. I sit on the risk mitigation committees within the bank, and at one stage we were looking at the amount of money we were lending on farm for commercial diversifications. And it was an astounding amount that it was getting close to some of the buffer zones of what we were comfortable with for our very small book during our early inception, because everybody bowled in, as you know, sort of post-COVID. Well, not everybody, that's a rather that's an exaggeration, but there were a higher proportion than normal of diversifications post-COVID, and there was a lot of people doing commercial lettings and tourism builds and all those kind of things. We weren't concerned about it, but it was noticeable as to how many farmers were doing it. And when we built the bank, we had no idea, and we never even dreamt that there would be that amount of money out the door for commercial diversifications of tourism and whatever.
Yeah, and for your to prepare for loans, do your budgets and cash flows need to be prepared by an accountant?
Not necessarily, typically with every loan application, we'll get the last 3 years worth of accounts, some management accounts for the current year if they're up to date, and then we would want to see projections from there. And this is a thing I alluded to. I mean, ag banking, there's a bit of an art to it, of sorts. It's not plug it into a computer and computer says yes, computer says no, right? There's a lot of grey area to it. There's seasonal fluctuations, and that's before you get to the price of wheat and milk for the past sort of 3-4 years, and what's going to happen next year. I mean, who knows yet? So generally, last 3 years worth of accounts, up to date management, as to where they're at and project forward from there in terms of a cash flow.
Brilliant, thank you. A question from one of the attendees, probably for you, Hannah. If the community might be in support of a diversification project, what are your views on a community right to build order or neighbourhood development order rather than the normal planning route?
I have never ever done one,
Right.
so I don't have a view.
Quite extreme.
That's a great question that I don't know the answer to, Nicola.
Okay, that's fine. We can.
I would have to go away and have a think about that one, to be honest. I've never done one via that route.
Okay.
I don't think it's very common.
Well, that might be the answer, really, if it's not very common, but we can come back to that.
I can ask around and see if anybody else in the team has come across it or not, but it's not something I have.
Okay. In terms
of Antony come across it?
Sorry.
No, actually, I was just glad that you took the question.
I should perhaps I asked the wrong person. Okay, another one then. In terms of farm diversification, approximately what kind of size of income streams could be had from biodiversity net gain agreements?
Good question.
Another good question.
Yes, having just put some, well, no, I wouldn't say we got it across the line, but we're certainly well down the process. I think it's worth stating that it's a competitive process. And recently I was at an event where they were talking about sort of non-profits really getting involved. So RSPB, other conservation trusts really getting involved and delivering at scale, and whether there is a place for delivery of smaller schemes as in eco bank type scenarios. So I would be cautious unless you have a very clear methodology, or if you've got a developer right on your doorstep who you can charge a premium. I would just be quite cautious. I know Matt's one of Matt's directors. This is right up his street, so I wondered if Matt might have an opinion on this.
Yeah, I mean the short. I mean we're looking at deals at the moment where the farm is being purchased and the loan is being 100% serviced by BNG credits. So it's not over the line. It's not a done deal or anything like that. But this is starting to happen more and more and more. You know, and it's bringing some complications. I suppose it's bringing more people to the land market, additional buyers. But we are very, very cautious because it is very early days, of course. And you know, yeah, it's.
I was just about to say that really. It's so early still, really is. I mean, I know that it's been in the ether for 2 years, hasn't it? But because it's now been put off for a few more months yet, and I think it's not until something becomes fully in regulation and fully it's in go that the market really thrashes itself out, is it? At the moment, it's still a little bit sort of forced, and it's like Antony said, it's these big boys at the moment. I think there perhaps is scope for some of the littler, developers, and really interesting, Matt, that it's looking at that sort of level. I think we've got to wait till early next year for the market to settle itself a little bit, haven't we? Sort itself out.
Great. Okay, we've got a few questions then. So we have somebody who's considering buying a farm as a new startup and want to set up diversification from the very beginning. Happy to start with permitted development and temporary use, particularly camping, on a 20-acre farm. Would like to set aside at least 5 acres for mixed diversification over time. How possible is it to finance such speculative plans? Matt, I assume that's you.
Sorry, it just cut out there, Nicola. Can you just repeat the?
Yeah, so the question basically is that you've got somebody who's considering buying a farm as a new startup with various levels of diversification, starting with permitted development, temporary use, particularly camping, and would like to set aside at least 5 acres for mixed diversification over time, which is obviously a speculative plan. How possible is it to finance such a speculative plan?
Not impossible is probably the first word that I would, or the first way I'd describe it. But you'd want to see some pretty robust, DD from consultants and local advisors on that.
Yeah,
for sure.
Okay. Yeah, great, thank you. What's the another question? What is the panel's opinion on solar projects? Anthony, one for you.
Yes, we have one at home, and we're looking to put in more. I think it's really down to grid connection. If you've got grid connection, then generally the solar providers will come knocking on your door. Above that, I think that the big solar schemes now, they're talking about 100 acres entry level. So it's interesting because it's becoming a bit more of a partnership where 2 neighbouring landowners or 2 or 3 might have to get together to deliver that area. So it might not be that it's all on your ticket, but it's certainly worth it. And as an aside, it is actually very good for your relationship with your bank manager, because he will love the steady income coming in. I'm just guessing, Matt.
Correct, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
Great. From your 2 perspective, what would you say is, I don't know whether you can answer this, but what would you say are the most profitable enterprises that you've seen? Mm-hmm.
I would say that where the comparison drops out is if you've got a historical asset. So if you've got a huge historical asset that's sitting there doing nothing, for example, I mean, we had a relatively well-clad cattle shed that I can think of, and all that was needed was a permitted development application, and then it's rented out. Now that, obviously, the return on that's going to look great, but fundamentally, it's been in the farming business for 20 years before it comes up. New builds, probably container storage, probably. You're talking about an 18-month payback, but planning wise, not generally the most the easiest to get past planners.
Okay. Any views, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I'll go back to probably one of my slides. The businesses that I see are the most profitable are the ones that keep it quite simple, and they focus on the controllables, cost of production, risk mitigation, and efficiencies. It's the farming business has gone from almost farming is still the core of the business, but it's about the best utilization of space. That's the kind of mindset. And probably one of the best ones I saw was in one of the eastern counties with a nice arable unit on the side and a whole load of indoor and outdoor commercial storage. That was comfortably one of the most profitable businesses I've ever seen in my entire banking career. And the indoor stuff was pretty simple, just grain storage type facilities, and the outdoor stuff was literally just an acre and a half fenced off outdoors, it was with keypad entry and reasonable security. Of course, geography and location had a fair bit to do with it, but it was extraordinarily simple and very low overheads, and you know, 2 parts to the business.
Yeah, I can get that. Here's another question, another sort of different question. So, are the panelists seeing a rise in interest in social value diversification, for example, opening up public access for the green agendas? And how far do the panelists think that we are away from these markets becoming more established financially?
I'll have a go first. I see it requested lots. Turning it into an income is very difficult. So 2 projects that we've been involved in: a woodland gym where people can run around the woods and do you know, keep fit exercises as they go round. That would utilise a coffee shop at the end, and I suppose another one where actually paying for the woodland was a bit of an issue, and so it was community led. So it was a college, and they were learning to plant trees by planting them on this guy's farm.
Okay. Yeah, so you've actually got to make money. That's the point, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. This is sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, we haven't seen many of those at all commercialised. So I would probably echo Anthony's messages there.
Me three. Yeah, same.
Okay. We've got a very planning related question, which we have. If you look at our YouTube channel and subscribe to the Royal Planning Co, you'll find a video or webinar on this specifically. But Hannah, just in your experience, is Class Q difficult to get to convert agricultural to residential? I mean, it's a whole topic, but I don't know whether you want to just briefly answer it.
It is a whole topic, and not wanting to promote it, but we've got an hour on it on YouTube, and it covers it in a lot of detail. So go and have a look at that. But Class Qs is permitted development. It's in black and white. It's criteria that you have to meet. Now, some of those criteria are objective. Is it a listed building? Yes or no. Is it an A or an B? Yes or no. They're easy. You can tick box those and park them. There are a few areas of subjectivity. The main one being about the construction of the building and whether it is suitable and sound, structurally sound, and whether it's going to be a true conversion or not. Now, that has quite a lot of sort of subjectivity to it. If the building meets all of those objective criteria, and it is you know, a really good solid building, it's made perhaps of breeze blocks or concrete paneling, and it's almost entirely enclosed, and that's probably a yes. If it's a tin shed with a few sort of wiggly telegraph poles, and that's probably a no. And you've got everything in between, and you'd have to look at, you know, somebody with some experience would have to look at each one in between. I quite like Class Qs because they're reasonably, you know, sort of, you can go through it and work through it, and you do need that level of experience to know what the local planning authorities are looking for and how to present your case. But Class Q definitely gives you opportunity for residential in locations where you wouldn't otherwise get it. So look at Class Q. If you've got anything that's you think might be suitable, ask us, have a look at the YouTube video. Yeah, use Class Q. It's very, very useful. Right.
Great, thank you very much. So we have just slightly run over on time. I would firstly like to thank all of our panelists and everybody that's watched the webinar, and thank you for joining us. Just a little bit, as Hannah has said, about us. Please do have a look at our YouTube channel. We are a team of highly skilled and experienced planning consultants with over 160 years of combined planning knowledge, and very passionate, as the others are here, about the development and growth of the rural sector. Hannah's been through that we cover a lot of rural planning, from agriculture, equestrian, rural business and residential. We do offer project appraisals, so if you're looking to see if you can get planning permission We have various levels, but if you wanted a level 1 project appraisal, you can use a code from this webinar and we'd be happy to help you and do that for half price. But again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to Anthony and Matt and Hannah. I think it was a really good webinar, very informative, and made all the better that Hannah was interrupted by one of her small children. So thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night.